Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Silicon Minds Human Hearts. Today we'll talk with Joseph, who's the chairman at Careful AI. Joseph,
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Could you please introduce yourself?
So my name is Joseph Connor. I belong to an organization called Careful AI, and we make AI safe and deployable to the masses, really.
Okay. What is making AI safe?
Well, I make it, in essence, we specialize in the regulated sector. So the regulated sector has lots of things that get in the way of bringing a product to market. Typically, safety criteria, requirements for involving people in the loop, requirements for involving the purchaser and the supplier, and etc. in the process of making models.
Okay.
So it's somewhat boring, but necessary, because you've got to get product to market, and if you don't address these issues, it can be problematic.
Isn't that more difficult now with language models? Because with, let's say, classic machine learning, we have like accuracy scoring, but with large language model, it's harder to get those ones?
It depends what you mean by accuracy, depends what you mean by safety.
Okay.
With large language models, if you're talking about making individual language models safe, you can't currently. You can make your own models, but it depends what you mean by a language model. So if you're talking about 4.0, Claude, any of the things that you can buy off the shelf, because you don't know the methods by which it's answering the question, in certain sectors like in healthcare, finance, etc., you couldn't defend your position as to whether that answer to the question was correct or not. So the worst case scenario, let's say in healthcare, you deploy an agent that's built on a language model. It's there and responsible for deploying an ambulance. It doesn't deploy an ambulance, then somebody dies. So what happens next is there's an inquiry, you end up in front of a coroner, and they ask you the questions as to what basis did that agent make that decision. And you may have your own RAG database, you may have your own methods, but if you didn't understand the question because you're using the ability to understand questions part of a language model, and you didn't understand it and you can't explain why you didn't understand it, you're still liable for it. So it's problematic to use language models because they're classified as software as unknown provenance, or SOUP.
So it's even a harder decision than for a like self-driving car. Which decision does he need to take if he needs to drive against someone, for example?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, we always have the idea of like when we have self-driving cars and he needs to make a decision of saving the driver or the person on the street. He also needs somehow to make that decision.
Yeah.
And who is he going to make that? Who is actually making that decision? Is the driver or the AI? At the end, it's the AI. But what decision is he going to make? He's still going to, or there's chance to, that someone dies, right? But it's the same with the story that you are telling right now. If an agent is used, an LLM agents, to answer, for example, emergency calls, if he doesn't understand him or he takes the wrong decision, can also someone who is dying, of course.
Well, Pete, I think if you take a sort of probabilistic risk assessment view of all things machine learning and AI, just algorithms, everything goes wrong at some point. There's nothing that's 100% accurate. So it's the degree of acceptability of that error that doesn't really get discussed. We end up starting our conversations along the lines of how wrong can you afford to be? And what happens if, the worst case scenarios, because if you don't address them at the beginning, they're going to come to get you anyway. And people can spend a lot of money and a lot of time building things out that do good things, but they don't look at the worst case scenario. So asking people how wrong they can afford to be is a good place to start.
That's what responsible AI stands for, asking questions.
Yeah, responsible AI has only been around for about 12 years as an initiative. It's interesting. Have you come across a process called local differential privacy? It's a bit techy, but it was came out in 2003, and it took 13 years before it was actually embodied in, I think, Apple's devices as a method of protecting the privacy of individuals.
Okay.
It sort of obfuscates your location, your history, etc. So it takes an inference from a person's interaction and passes the inference back and hides the person, the source of that data. It took 13 years for that to happen. It's coming up to the 13th year for responsible AI, and we're still only talking about it. And it means different things to different people. But at the end of the day, you're correct. It means talking to people about all things from the design, the development. I'll get that word out again. It means all things to the design and the development and the deployment of it and the ongoing monitoring of it. But because people who are involved in the creating of algorithms don't actually get involved often in the deployment of them, there's something that's lost en route. So the traceability of everything is important. So much more, we've created a bot called Tracy to explain traceability to software people because they don't understand the importance of it, and to explain it to originators of ideas because they don't know that if they don't address traceability, they won't be able to deploy it. So traceability is interesting. I think it's the future of responsible AI, and because there aren't enough people talking about responsible AI. There aren't enough people doing it. If you think about what it is, it's just following data, its provenance, what happened en route. Software systems are good at that. So I think the future of responsible AI is actually putting systems in place to make it happen automatically. And that includes also regulatory compliance. I think maybe the saving of responsible AI is going to be, I haven't thought about this before, but maybe the saving of it is going to be large language models and their ability to interpret information that sits in front of them fast. Interesting. What do you think?
I think regulatory, there's going to be a lot of changes and blocking off things that shouldn't be happening, which is good. But I also believe that it's also going to slow down certain things. Just as you said about like licensing for in the medical industry, might be maybe not going to be that hard like in the medical industry, because although sometimes we have AI tools that are making decisions for human lives, and then there should be decent checks on it, of course. But we have in Europe the EU AI Act, which has plenty of good things. One of the things I like personally is like when something is generated by AI, that it also needs to be added to it, like it needs to be shown that it's generated by AI.
I think that covers so many things you want to talk about, so many interesting subjects, like understanding where your data comes from. I never understood why, and I sort of petitioned for a while that the confidence rating on large language models, when they return a response, that they should actually present a confidence rating with everything, because it would start a conversation about how wrong is that information likely to be. It's interesting, if you can force ChatGPT and other agents to return the confidence rating to their responses and make it visible to the user. And it does increase people's awareness that it's actually not a human. And it's the unfortunate bit that because it's very convincing, language models in terms of what they're designed to be, they speak better than I do. Okay, so if everything that came out of my mouth was with a confidence rating, then it would probably be very high.
You were 100% confident of what you were saying.
Like most, but it doesn't mean I'm right. And we've all got our biases. We've all got our data sources. And in humans, we've got a lot of experience and the ability to extrapolate data and experiences and enunciate them. And I think we should expect that from agents sooner rather than later, because it will start a conversation, not necessarily for people like you and I who are in the industry, but for the people who are not in the industry and for younger people who will look at it with maybe an engineer's eye in the future, rather than just oh yeah, that was interesting, or just discount it, or it's a falsehood. If it comes back with a confidence rating, then it starts a conversation about the meaning of it and where it came from. I'm not seeing that done yet. Maybe if it was done after this event, it was because of this conversation.
Exactly. But
you heard it here.
We can see that same story also with search engines. Initially, people were searching things, and the first thing they saw on the internet is they believed it. But over time, they also started to understand that not everything that is on the internet is the truth. And that's the same thing with when you talk with, like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. They try to do their best to give the correct answers by also making references to the articles that they've used to it. But then the question is also, how many times will people check that reference? Or if it's actually there.
I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm the person who, before my children were allowed to have an app, I made them read the terms and conditions of every single app. Hated. I'm going to say hated as a parent. But it does give you, it does give kids a different perspective if you get them to look at the origins of the data and where it came from. I think if we're naturally curious, I think one of the few things we've got as mankind is curiosity. And if we don't look into the references, then really what purpose, what value are we? What value are we to an AI agent? As you know, I asked the question of an AI agent, what purpose are humans and what's the value of humans to the workforce? Mm-hmm. And it gave, I think, a reasonable response.
Okay.
And it profiled it as a radar diagram, and I published it in my LinkedIn profile just to see what would happen. Very few people understood it. But it's if you worry about the future, and I do worry about the future, then I think it's worthwhile bearing in mind what this can do for human interaction and our ability to spread information and our ability to learn things quickly. As you know, we've got more agents, AI agents in Carefully AI than we've got people.
How do you do that?
Well, we have people who... Well, we call on people to deliver advice as and when needed.
Okay.
But it's the frequency with which people ask advice is irregular. So we ask people who we work with to create AI agents, and there's a number of them you will find on the Carefully AI website. So they go for everything from ideation to deployment to coding to safety to regulation to route to market strategies to ongoing market research, to well-being, all the things that you have to look at when you're deploying tech. But we haven't got the people to do that, but we have got the agents to answer questions on it. So we've got a bot that's very good at doing motivational interviewing, which if you're deploying a system, you really do need to know why people are using it, how and why. We've got a bot that looks at understanding people's emotional responses to things. So it uses techniques like CBT to understand how people are framing the information that they get. All these agents are useful to us for the deployment of safe AI, and it allows us to do it at scale. Because people want to, when they're trading in Europe, we live in because we're European. You know, I like to think of myself as European. People might think of me as British or Welsh, but I think of myself as European. And to the outside world, Europe is a very big landmass where people talk different languages, and they have different regulations. They're very good at regulation. And
we're the best, I think.
Yeah. we do regulations, and America does innovation. That's often said, isn't it? But I come from Britain, which is like a small island at the edge of the Atlantic, and part of that is Wales, which is like the annexed bit of Great Britain on the side. We're still good at regulation. Wales was the birthplace of the NHS, right? So it's the birthplace of the 6th largest organisation in the world. It has 1.5 million people who work in it, and everything that came about as a consequence of how it operates, its customs and practices, came about because of the type of thinking that Wales and Britain is good at, which is trying to protect the individual. We're good at protecting the individual. In Europe, we like to think we're good at protecting the individual, but it comes with lots of bells and whistles in terms of processes. And I think that's something that people might look at us and think, it's too hard. And I would agree with them. It is too hard to do business in the UK and Europe, and we need to make it easier. I'm very unpopular with the regulatory consulting community, because I believe them to be a barrier to the deployment of safe regulation.
Okay.
In
How
essence,
so?
Let's look at the process of regulation. The regulation is a standard, and if you want to apply to comply with that regulation, you need to be able to understand the standard. You need to apply it to what you do. You need to evidence that you're doing it, and you need to show somebody, an approved body or a defined body in your country, that you're doing that. What in essence is that? That is you changing what you do. So that's changing your custom practices. That often manifests itself in procedures and the evidence that those procedures have changed and adapted over time. And that involves then applying that to a standard, which means reading the standard and looking for evidence in what you do. Forgive me, but that's what large language models are very good at. And rather than just doing it once a year, just to get a badge of honor, if you were to deploy them regularly in your business, you could show continued compliance. Why are we employing people to read documents about what we do to show evidence? And because they're a rate limiting step in the process, they're very hard to access and very costly. Why are we doing that? Is it safe to do that? Is it safe to employ people to read your document once a year to say that you're doing the right thing? It's not, especially in AI. AI is about making sure that you're continually compliant. You're changing your product so it's fit for purpose. If you're not doing that, you haven't got a safe product. So the regulatory community hates this conversation because what I'm saying to them is you could have greater impact if you were to deploy models. You could put your badge of honor on it, but you're not making things safe. You're getting in the way, and particularly you're getting in the way of innovation. So
it's an interesting thought to do it like that.
Well, is it the ground truth? It's a perspective. I come to it because I used to be the innovations director for the NHS in AI. And if you think about the impact you can have by generating inferences that are understandable and traceable in healthcare with data that's accurate and with the correct ground truths, you can be quite impactful with that. That might take you 6 months to a year to make. It would take you 2 to 5 years to get it through compliance at this time, by which time it is either irrelevant or not fit for purpose anymore. So I think regulation in this domain is fit for purpose but applied incorrectly. It can't continue like this, otherwise why would anybody want to do things in meaningful sectors that are important to people?
It's a very good question that I think on governmental level they'll need to look more into that and see how they can change it.
Yeah, but people don't know what, if we're talking about AI. Most people don't know what AI is.
That's another problem.
That's so and there's too much fear-mongering about what it is. It's maths, compute, and statistics.
If you look at the first writings that were made for the EU AI Act, you could see that people didn't really get what AI was and where we were at that time. But of course, let's be happy there were some new versions of it until what we have now, the final one.
Yeah.
But, now, just if you focus on using carefully AI, how do you use it in your personal life?
In my personal life?
Yeah.
I use it a lot for making myself more efficient.
Okay.
It's interesting. Yesterday, we were approached by a foreign government that wanted to develop an AI lab. And I was completely unaware of what that government's activities are, what their GDP was, what the infrastructure of their government was, who controlled what, who and why. Using language agents, we were able to define that. We were able to create an influence diagram, so who are the major players, who does what, how and why. So that gave us a good indication of, that took an hour. So I couldn't have done that before.
Or you needed lots of time to get it
that's
done.
That's the 6-month discovery project. And then we looked at what the desired output was, and we said, okay, well, let's make it bigger. What happens if we make it bigger? And what would that impact be on the GDP? And if we broadened it just beyond healthcare into everything else? And so the what-if questions resulted in a series of what we would call mermaid charts.
Okay.
Charts that describe processes. So this is Sunday. You've got to bear in mind, I'm with my family. So I'm with my family. We're having a conversation. In between, I'm preparing all this. By the end of the afternoon, unbeknownst to my family, but beknownst to my team, we got a really decent proposal out the door. So my quality of life just went up massively. I was able to do something in timescales that I could hitherto would not have been able to do because language agents existed. The challenge, however, is you've got to know how to use them. You've got to know how to engage them. You've got to have a curious mind. You've got to have very good use of the English language. So, and putting reasoned arguments together and using them to challenge your own thinking. So I think we use them. We obviously use agents to code. We use agents to follow code design. We use agents to follow code quality, continuous monitoring. We use agents to give advice. But in my own life, I use them primarily for creating content because I'm a dyslexic.
Okay.
Right? So asking me to write anything is painful.
Mm-hmm.
But I can ask a language agent for information, present it in a way that I can easily digest it, which is a mermaid chart, and produce that very, very quickly. So I think in terms of accessibility for that community, I mean, it hasn't been even talked about, but it's for those people who need to produce documents, it's a great asset.
That brings us to efficiency. AI improves, or as humans, our efficiency increases a lot, isn't it?
Okay. Efficiency implies successful outcomes.
That's also true.
So I think what it does do is increase the speed with which you can either become right or wrong very quickly.
Exactly. That's a better understanding out of it.
So,
do you think, because I know you've also been working, or you worked on something concerning mental health, the amount of work that we do now because of making use of tools like LLMs, we can do way more work than in the past. Do you think that will work on our mental health?
Okay. There are different forms of mental health. So we have physical health. What people don't realize, if you're not in the industry, is that we have both physical health and mental health, and there are different forms of mental health. And I think AI will have a positive effect and a negative effect on mental health, depending on where you are, and then depending on where you come into and you first engage them. So if generally your well-being is good, and if your lifestyle is what you want it to be, and you're living in a world that's not threatened by AI, then it will have a potentially positive effect on your mental well-being. It will allow you to be seen to be more efficient. Whether you're right or wrong, obviously, it depends. I worry more about have you ever come across cognitive dissonance? So people represent cognitive dissonance in their speaking when they are not thinking about things maybe as they should do. And I've not yet seen an AI agent represent cognitive dissonance, but I can imagine it not being too far away. Whether that's coded in on purpose or just happens by accident. When that happens, when people represent strong views, when a bot represents strong views to somebody who's already got strong views, and you get affirmation of a negative view of oneself, I think that's dangerous. So I think there's a need to look for cognitive dissonance in AI agents, because they can proliferate it, because it's conversation. So if I'm angry and you're angry, and we're both angry about the same thing, it's going to end in one direction, which is probably us being more angry, or at least seen to be more angry. So that's the negative side. The positive side is, if you think about the way in which people deal with their own mental health, if it's, there are different levels of it, but we talk about the, and I don't like the levels, so I don't want to talk about them, but we're talking about very mild mental health issues. People can often sort them out by talking to people. So it's like, if you've got a problem, I've got a problem, we talk about it. The fact that I'm listening to myself speak, I'm almost listening to somebody, and you've given me, as you well know, your head nodding, and you're giving positive affirmation for my views, and I'm talking more. As I'm talking, I'm actually sorting out my own problems. There's a role for conversational agents in that, if the person who provides them does not use them for the purposes of anything other than helping the individual. If they're using them to profile an organization, a person, which I've seen examples of, and there's nobody being prepared to be transparent about where those conversations go, how they're used, whether they're used for purposes the person didn't want, then if they're not done for that, if the person's privacy is upheld, and they're simply there to enable somebody to have a conversation, and that conversation does not go anywhere other than where that person wants it to go, then I see some very positive benefits for them. Because there aren't enough people for people to talk about, especially about things that matter to them. And they do find agents useful to talk to.
If you look at the shortage in psychologists only. And many of those people just need a conversation sometimes.
Yeah. But, I mean, I didn't know at the time that 1 in 4 people are probably going to have a journey into anxiety or depression over their lives. So if you think that's 1 in 4 people, so that's 10 million people at least, at any one time, may be suffering from anxiety and depression. They may be journeying into the situation getting worse. It's often remedied by people just being able to talk to their friends, their loved ones. And that's the thing, encouraging people to speak to other people is something that agents can do. You don't have to speak to a bot. You can improve people's mental health by encouraging them to follow the 5 ways to well-being, one of which is talking to somebody about how you feel.
Exactly. Now, that's one thing that maybe we will look forward to in the future.
Mm-hmm.
What other things you think we will see in the coming future linked to AI?
A bit like us, and we talked about when we first met. I am actually at a meeting at the moment.
No, you're here with me.
I'm here with you, but the agent version of myself
Okay.
is at another meeting, because I can't be there because I'm talking to you. It's interesting because we're in tech, and you'd expect that people would feel comfortable with that originally. Originally, they weren't really comfortable that the digital version of Joe is turning up to the meeting. So what I see in the near future, I see agents, because we're in the Microsoft building at the time, we'll call them co-pilots, will be digital representations of ourselves, digital twins, if you wish, that will be able to listen, ask questions, how we would ask questions, respond, how we would respond to. And if you want, I can go into the technical detail of how that was done, but in essence, what I think for the big wild world outside of that window, what is coming is having digital versions of ourselves do our work with us. That raises a whole bunch of questions. One, our ability to control them, our ability to use them. Who else can use them, for what purposes and why? But I think it's coming.
Then we will talk about digital identities, copies of ourselves.
Yeah. Well, in essence, the agent that has gone to the meeting on my behalf it has the RAG, it has everything that I would have made reference to in a RAG database that can answer questions on.
So it
I'm an old
answers questions, it asks questions.
Yeah.
But textual or also with voice?
Not with voice.
Okay,
no.
just text.
We have
it
voice
listens
agents.
and it sends and chats then the question.
We have voice agents, but they're not. Language models are not as good as you would expect. Vocal language models aren't as good. I'm from the north of England, although I live in Wales. So if I met somebody from the north of England, they wouldn't understand the dialect, and that's the thing that you have to be careful about. If it's written down, it's much easier. So getting lost in translation is something that we're going to see. We're going to see.
I told you I started as a consultant here in the UK, and for me, the different kinds of dialects that you have already in the UK, I'm very glad that there's transcription in certain tools, so it can help me reading what is actually being said, because it's sometimes very hard to get it.
It's astonishing. I come from the north of England, where they talk right broad and like right proper, with really flat vowels and that. And it's the only place I've ever seen on the BBC TV where they actually, this is the 1960s, had to have subtitles because they couldn't understand them.
Well, I'm from that same kind of region in Belgium, where only that region they put subtitles.
But so maybe our ability to communicate will improve.
But also, I think those kind of dialects over time, it will also be able to understand it over time. More and more data is getting collected, and
we're both in the same sector, okay? Mm-hmm. So you look somewhat surprised that I have an AI agent going to a meeting on my behalf, which I found surprising, but maybe okay. But why wouldn't you?
It's a good question.
Why wouldn't you? If in essence, if you want to have an impact and you want to do good things, we are limited as humans as to our ability to have an impact. We have one of our bots. I'll tell you this story because it will reiterate the point. Historically, I went from nuclear industry, doing probability risk assessment for nuclear reactors, and then into R&D, and then into consulting, and then went into the finance sector, looking at and doing routes to market strategies for VC firms, etc., and the things that they bought into market primes. And we have a bot called Strat. In essence, it produces a route to market strategy in 6 iterations. And one of the things I've discovered, and this is for you and for you, definitely for you, is when you create these things and they represent you, the one thing you want the ability to do is to switch them off. Right? And I can assure you will want to do them for 2 reasons. One, when they start off, they're not very good. At one point, however, you will find out that they're better. So Strat can produce a route to market strategy that's much better than I have ever did. It's really, really annoying. Yeah, really annoying. I was never that good. But it's useful. But because I'm in control of it, I can live with it.
And you can make better decisions at the end. Because you're making the final decision.
People don't approach me anymore for route to market. They just speak to Strat.
Okay.
And it produces the route to market strategy for them. But I think the important thing is not how good it is, because they can be good and they can be bad and they can change over time. It's that the point I would make is the individual should be given control of the agent that represents them. And that control should extend to the point of being able to switch them off.
Yeah.
Because I don't rely on Strat for my livelihood. There was a time when I would have. But imagine a world that you've got access to every single question and answer set that's ever been created. What does that do to the professional services sector? What does that do to the professional?
A lot.
Okay. I would argue that the process of regulation should be, which is in the EU AI Act, that you have the ability to have a say in that process. There are some countries that are rinsing interactions between agents and humans and other humans to create better agents to be able to deliver professional services and other things. For the purposes of what? To make money, probably. Great, but what impact is that going to have on the communities that hitherto used to have that? Now, some people might say, well, things change. We've had industrial revolutions before, but maybe we should go back and remember what industrial revolutions can do, the social upheaval that they can create, and prepare people for that. The future of work, I think, is down to, at this time, the ability to be curious, the ability to question, critically question, the ability to learn, and the acceptance that things are going to change quickly, and politically, we should have an impact on that. I think I'm busy teaching my kids to have that critical thinking, that curiosity, because it's something that's not going to go away.
In our recordings today, we've already had 3 people who say exactly the same. Curiosity, critical thinking.
Oh, good.
Are the main points for society right now.
I'm really pleased because I haven't heard anybody mention it.
We need to start thinking as toddlers again, asking questions.
And toddlers the best.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when you lose that ability to think, you become less creative. We have currently more neurons than anybody can currently compute. And we need to make sure we don't lose that creativity. I hope so.
So what kind of advice would you be able to give our audience? Like, this is what you need to look into right now.
Who is your audience? Who would you say your audience is?
This can be business people who want to invest in AI or use AI in their companies. It can be software developers, data scientists. It's very broad.
Okay, so if we're talking about businesses and data scientists, I say the businesses, go back to the day you set out on a piece of A4 what you thought you were going to do and what the user experience is, and then imagine what it will be in a world where you can think faster with as much knowledge as you could possibly access. Would you do the same thing? Would you still have the same business model? Is everything that you've invested in to date still pertinent? And in terms of the people that may come with you on that journey, how ready are they for that change? Because it is coming. I'm an old man, I've seen lots of changes over time, people, but I haven't seen anything as drastic as this is going to be for knowledge-based sectors. I do like the phrase, if you're in business, that it's not AI is not going to do you out of business, it's people with AI will do it out of business. And you need to understand the competitive landscape that you go into. We have a bot called CompBot that looks at your competitive landscape and understands where you stand and indicates the degree of AI awareness that exists within the individual's organizations. Because you need to get ready not just to compete, but compete with their ability to use AI to beat you. But businesses are relatively small organizations. I think if we're involved in this sector, most people in this sector come from a technical background. And to be technically curious if you're an engineer of any form, you typically learn things fast, you try to break things quickly, and you try to learn quickly. I think would encourage most of them to show more interest in what the user experience is of the technology rather than the making of it. And by user experience, I'm not talking about the first user experience, I'm talking about the continued user experience of it. Because machine learning and AI is not machine learning AI if it stays static. And the continued ability to change those algorithms, those methods, that user experience is something that people in the sector, there will always be a role for that. Rather than just coding or just ML ops or individual bits, tapping into your younger toddler and being curious about what actually happens down the line. Because if you're a techie person, you often don't see what the customer's user experience is.
You see that in many applications sometimes.
Yeah, and you don't make a good product, I think, as a consequence of that. So forcing your organization to give you access to the customer is important for technical people, because if it involves AI, the closer they are to the marketplace, the better the product is going to be. So I think as a businessman, if you're employing AI consultants, AI staff, you need to give them access to, they're not somebody who sits in the back office. They're not somebody who sits in a computer. They're the people, arguably, that you need to put in front of your customers and give them very good listening skills.
Exactly.
More than the other two used to do.
Yeah. I think that's a nice one to close down.
Okay.
After this nice conversation, really enjoyed it, Joseph. It's
pleasure.
Very
Thank you for having
insightful and what you're doing, and also what we need to look into right now and what we need to be careful of.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Joseph.